I don't have the specific date, but what I know for sure is that in 78 he was abducted once, and in 80 he was abducted again. In the papers there's a section where he describes the abduction phenomenon. In person, they say yes, that he'd been abducted and so on, but always in a very metaphorical and energetic way. So, I want to read what he wrote in his diary. When my ears perceive something that my eyes cannot see, my other senses seem to drift away from my body. But in it, on my skin, wrinkled by a strange chill, the mark remains as a witness, and in this is my comfort. Knowing that something has entered my mind, something superior that my 5 senses or infinite senses could not reach. I smile with satisfaction while my companion tells me, it's incredible. I find no logical explanation and even less any humor in it. Once again, I smile without being able to answer him, because what had logic has even less logic after coming out and having closed while it dies from my sense. I don't know exactly what the text means, but I find it interesting that what the senses don't capture, the skin does. And that's something that's been said. You've already explained it about Sedona, the one who had half an orgasm. Today, I explained it with Joan, with Pep. Clement, who feels this. So I found it curious that everyone who encounters these energies at least got goosebumps, but Joan went a step further and says he was abducted. It wasn't an abduction where they went inside a ship and did experiments, but rather, for a few hours, he was in another sense and he came back with a different energy, like they entered him more than him entering a ship. It was a bit like, I have the devil inside me by Tomeo Peña, but it was, I have an alien inside me, that kind of feeling. Something very interesting that Natrini told me as a side note is that she lived in London, she lived in Barcelona, and obviously Barcelona and London are very impressive cities where there's a lot of culture, a lot going on, lots of concerts. And at that time, he returned to Solar. And he says that in Solar, there was more going on than on the other side of the world. He ended up telling me that in this Solar, for a long time, he told his friends from Barcelona, you have to come here, because what happens here is wonderful. What else happened in 78, or rather what didn't happen? A person arrived named Jose, who was a Christian person, someone who had studied theology, who was training to be a friar. In fact, he studied for many years with some friars, I'm not sure which ones, and he went to Solar to follow his spiritual path. And he moved in parish circles, especially with young people, and he liked to preach the word of God. He was Andalusian, so I'm told, and had a strong Andalusian accent. So far, so normal, but one wonders why this man ended up in Solar and not in a church or the cathedral, or he didn't go elsewhere, he came to Solar. Because this man had the peculiar characteristic that when he preached the word of God, he held a Bible in his hand and mixed his message a little bit with extraterrestrials. So we could say that when he came to Sawyer, he already had that distinctly fixed gaze. That he wasn't just meant to be a Christian, but a post-Christian. It's a bit like modern Scientology. And he would stand on a chair and start preaching. He had a sacred Bible in one hand and a small bag of marijuana in the other, and if you spent some time with him, he'd invite you to smoke with him. Things happen, and of course he gained more and more followers. The funny thing about this person is that he preached the word of God with aliens as if it were... Imagine a person walking through the villages, going to parish centers, not inside the church, and normalizing something that in other villages or parts of the world would be very strange. But at that time in Soya, this became it became normalized. And besides, if he's handing out marijuana, I don't need to tell you how many young people followed him. What other elements were there in 78 that stood out and emerged? There are a series of articles that talk about this. This isn't something that happened in 68, but it was revisited, we could say. There's a cave called the Santorella Cave, which is also called the Martian's Cave, Kwaisa. So Jaume Dea will explain it much better. He's a professional archaeologist, also my cousin, I won't lie to you, so he's an archaeologist, and he'll explain this entire cave situation to us.
Back in the 1970s, several ancient engravings were discovered deep within the Santorella Cave, which is a unique cave naturally shaped like a vulva. And what about these mysterious engravings? There are some that represent geometric motifs. They're like squares with lines inside. And then there are others. For instance, there is one specific scene depicting masked individuals having sexual relations. And of course, considering the historical era they should belong to, they have absolutely no known parallel. And these types of symbols are very strange indeed. We simply do not know which specific culture to attribute them to. Some researchers have even dared to suggest if this could potentially be from some extraterrestrial culture. This is because, of course, since we have documented signs of a UFO presence in the surrounding Kuber and Gorg Blau reservoir area, and this site is located right nearby, it could very well be directly linked to all of that.
So what Jaume says is very curious because this was already in the caves. The caves already had these paintings, supposedly from hundreds of years ago. There are even some that say they might be prehistoric, but it wasn't until then that they were revisited and reinterpreted. And the truth is, if you see the drawings, it makes you think, and this connects a lot with the fact that at that time, many people reported seeing UFOs. But things went even further, where there were people who saw aliens and who had direct encounters.
We slowly walked through the dense forest. We went to a small tent for the girls and me, and curiously, around 3 in the morning, I was suddenly alarmed by the fact that there was total silence. I came out of the tent and saw that there were about 20 children standing there. Well, of course, you see a whole bunch of them, a bunch of kids. And the first thing I asked them was, "Do you want water? Do you want to eat?" Because I thought, they've gotten lost around here. There were no other neighbors nearby. And automatically, instead of answering me with words, it was a telepathic message that scared me a lot, because they told me, "No, we don't want anything. We've come to get you." They were between 80 centimeters and a meter tall. They weren't any taller. I mean, I mistook them for children of 9 or 10 years old. Something like that, but they had very big heads. Their heads were sort of elongated, but they gave off a lot of peace.
So it's also curious, this thing about the drawings, because it also connects a lot with South America. I don't know if it's a cave in... Oh, not a cave. No, it's a desert in Bolivia. I don't remember the name, where there's also a Martian, an extraterrestrial, and it's been proven to be about 2,000 or 3,000 years old, and it's drawn in a certain way that they say these must be extraterrestrials. And that also explains the Nazca lines and those things a bit. Because let's not kid ourselves, the UFO, alien, and paranormal movement often has a racist component. And it's funny because the Nazca lines couldn't have been made by... Natives couldn't do it. They were made by extraterrestrials. During colonization, they claimed people couldn't build things like the pyramids or anything else. A white man, they think they couldn't have done it. So they attribute it to extraterrestrials. That's a separate issue. But it's curious that the Martian caves already had this mysticism of a cave shaped like a vagina, where mysterious extraterrestrials have traveled in and out. The spaceships are also distinctly shaped like a vagina. Turned around, well, there was a whole body of literature that talked about these things and connected them. And this wasn't just talked about in Sawyer, it was also talked about in those magazines I mentioned, like Stendick. And of course, it was connecting all over Europe and feeding into itself and seeking new connections, right? Like how Sawyer, the same drawings that might also be in the Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia, which connects with Peru, with Nazca, a whole international connection. In fact, because of this connection we have with this extraterrestrial in South America, possibly that's why people from South America and Mexico came all the way to Sawyer. I'm not saying they came just to see it, but maybe some acquaintances told them and they made a trip closer by. I imagine that, because coming from Mexico to Sawyer to see the 22nd of June, well, we're getting there. We're getting there. Another question is, why do the extraterrestrials arrive on June 22nd and not August 14th or February 4th? Or July 20th, which is my birthday, the day man reached the moon? Because I have actually asked a considerable number of people about this, right here, and there are many, many doubts. Some people say it was chance. Some people say they agreed, right? And the one who convinced me the most, because it's something that happened recently, is that the mountain says it. Because they say that at that time, if you looked at the mountain from, I don't know exactly what angle, you would see that between the dense forest of holm oaks, wild olives, and all that, and the pines, there were like some large holes as if many trees were missing, and it clearly spelled out the numbers 226. Other people said no, it's 226. Others said it was 223, because depending on how you read it, it was hard. But the vast majority agreed it was 226. 226 is June 22nd. There you go. So June 22nd, you have to go to the mountain. Why? Because the mountain says so. Now, you'll tell me, Guillem, this is a total load of absolute bullshit. But for sure, the people say there's a number on the mountain, 22 of the 6th. That's 22 of June. So this, in the very end, we'll connect it for you now because it seems surreal. But even today, there are still certain beliefs that back this up. Okay? Joan announces, After seeing the 226, I guess after several long meetings at the Memphis bar and talking extensively with UFO experts, he says that on June 22nd in the early morning, they'll finally arrive. So from the 22nd to the 23rd, the aliens will arrive. But he doesn't just simply say the aliens will arrive. He furthermore asserts that they will depart alongside these beings. Just as he says it, all of Spain coordinates in UFO movements with the Center for Interplanetary Studies, who are among those contributing a significant amount of detailed information to the magazine that I previously mentioned, Stendesk, that is the Center for Interplanetary Research of Catalonia. It's a group of people that's still active today and has a blog spot and has all its magazines published from the 50s. Until now, they're still publishing. Of course, these people spread the word and were responsible for specifically promoting this date. And that's why they decided to hold the very first a significant and unified interplanetary meeting, which means that humans connect with certain other planets. And now June 22nd has arrived. We're on June 22nd, 1978, going back 2 days. Let's say the 20th. They say that in Sawyer. People from outside started arriving. If it's the 22nd, you don't arrive then. You arrive a bit earlier to get some perspective, meet people and all that stuff. So they say that 2 days before, people started coming from everywhere. People dressed eccentrically, people who, when you see them, you say, okay, this one's coming to the Unitary Interplanetary Meeting, or whatever it's called. So we're talking about days before people started coming. Sawyer started filling up. There were people who also complained. Of course, there are phone recordings of people complaining because there were people coming with nothing to their name, people camping wherever, who went to the Sawyer Ravine, to the public laundries, because then, of course, the Sawyer laundries, there's still a bunch left. They could shower there, and then the shouting and the sound of phone voices. What is this? About people showering in the laundries and so on, right? That kind of imagined the friction in a town where everyone wanted to believe, but at the same time, there were people who must have said they're all fucking crazy. The crazies are invading us, right? Imagine, put yourself in the shoes of a lady, whoever she may be, but 60 years old, conservative, Catholic, apostolic, Roman, who has served, who has done everything, and suddenly sees that they no longer believe in God or anything, that Joan Coy dressed up as a priest and got married. I don't know who's preaching, that there's another preacher walking around with marijuana, preaching that aliens will arrive, that suddenly there's a world UFO meeting, and I don't know, 8,000 have come. Well, I won't say the number, you'll see later. People start arriving to shower. This lady, she must have thought it was the apocalypse. The only thing she can do is she'd call Franco and say it on Twitter, but Franco wasn't there anymore. And the only thing she can do is make a phone call saying, there are people showering stark naked in the laundry basins of Fornalutz. A bit of empathy for the lady, a bit of empathy. She had a terrible time. She's dead and buried now, but well, a hug to her in heaven. What else happened? On the 22nd, in the evening, Joan, the whole Memphis was full. Everyone was going to the Memphis. I mean, Joan didn't have any kind of hesitation. He closed the bar, and the people coming, who were the mystics, the UFO buffs, the hippies, well, people who believe in alternative things, were left a bit orphaned, wandering around there. More details about Joan that I found very funny. Joan, of course, said he would leave. Everyone said that on the 22nd, from the 22nd to the 23rd. He'd leave with the aliens. And he was asked, and what will you do with the bar? And Joan, I've been told, always said, yeah, I don't know, do you want to keep it? And the other guy, man, don't tell me that. Yes, you keep it, here are the keys, and so on. And the other guy, well, don't be like that. And suddenly he says, yes, because on the 23rd and 24th, I need you to make the coffee at 7 in the morning. Is that okay? And the other guy, man, no, Joan. Joan already had this joke of, I'll give you the bar, but if you keep it, make coffee at 7 in the morning. Told by his closest family, he went to his mother and said, Mom, I'm leaving tonight. And his mother, and what will you do? What will you do? And well, I'll leave. And his mother says, then I'll have to pack your suitcase. Yes. And his mother packed Joan's suitcase. He took the suitcase, and witnesses saw Joan crossing with the suitcase. Everyone asked, where are you going, Joan? And he said, I'm leaving, goodbye. And Joan was never seen again. At 7 in the evening, people started going up on and on. Think that from Sawyer all the way to the top. There are people who were walking, which must be exhausting. Well, like I do, on foot, you go through the ravine, and it takes, 3 or 4 hours, a good while. There were people in cars, people hitchhiking, and from 7 on, it kept going up, and up. They say that by 8:30 or 9, it was already full. And what happened is that the road started filling up with cars. They say that at midnight, in a town like Sawyer, which had 10,000 inhabitants, there were more than 9,000 people up there. It's always a bit of the same. It depends on who you ask. If you ask the police, the organizer, it's all the same. Some people say there were 10,000, some say 15,000, which seems a bit much because there's no way to calculate it. But the most pessimistic say 6,000, which is a lot. The funny thing is that there weren't many Mallorcans, which is what makes it funnier. Obviously, there might have been 1,000 or 2,000 Mallorcans, but all the others, they say many spoke English or spoke Russian or French. There were people from everywhere. What happened up there? Well, there was a wonderful party. People started drinking. Some people went up with guitars. Some went up with tents, with sleeping bags. Everyone lay down looking up while everyone experienced the story in their own way. Groups were formed. They played amongst themselves. I've been told some people went there to pick up girls. There were people who went to the lifelong womanizers. There were people going there, moving from group to group. Let's see what we find today. And what a magical night. I imagine a typical Mallorcan womanizer saying, well, no picking up today. Forget the Port of Sawyer. Today we're picking up at Cuba. And going from group to group like, hi, how are you? Want to meet a Mallorcan? And so on and so forth. I won't make basic jokes, but you get the idea. I put myself in the shoes of a womanizer with this UFO fever, and it could be quite funny. One curious thing is that Joan didn't show up. Joan didn't show up that evening. And that's what I find the funniest. Why didn't he show up? Mysteries plus other times I haven't mentioned when Joan disappeared. Like, for example, it was actually the very first time that Jimenez del Oso came. And he was originally supposed to interview him in person for the show. Trini told me that. Minutes before the interview, he said he wasn't feeling well, acted confused, disappeared, and sent Trini instead. And Trini ended up chatting with Jimenez del Oso during some statements that she told me. And between us, she made it all up because she didn't know what to say. She started saying yes, that he'd said things, and Jimenez del Oso started to pressure her. And yeah, whatever. But she testified instead of Joan because Joan had also disappeared. Trini told me that Joan rewarded her with a bottle of whiskey for the trouble. Anyway, back to the case. That Joan, on June 22nd, didn't show up. I also have to say, to get to Cuba without GPS, you had to use imagination and intuition. Being from Sawyer, he still knew how to get there. But being from out of town, you hitchhike and hope for the best. And others went cross-country saying, I'm told it's that way. And keep on walking, because if you go on foot, it might take 3 or 4 hours or 5. But I don't even want to imagine how many people must have gotten lost. Because if 8,000 or 9,000 or 10,000 arrived, or however many, there must have been at least 100 completely lost all over. The magic question is, did the aliens arrive? No, nothing arrived. Did they get mad at us? No, they just stayed there. According to what I'm told, they had a wonderful evening. They saw each other, the womanizers did their thing. They just took it as it was, basically. It was a rave. They had a UFO rave. I guess among all those people, like the classic indignant Mallorcan, like, this is a madhouse. Where are the men? Nobody believes in good Jesus anymore. Who was indignant? I guess there were indignant people. On the other hand, people who went there in suits, because it's very funny to see photos. Since many people who believe in aliens and such, the experts, they wore suits. Like, we're not psychologists, we're parapsychologists. And they dress in the same style as if they were doctors. And I imagine a crowd of party people and dressed up people saying, excuse me, I'm a real ufologist. You guys just got here. I've been listening since the first record. Or Jones, I've been here since 1974. I'm here, you only found out 2 days ago. Let me see the sky. I imagine this guy. Where do these people come from? Are you a ufologist? I believe before you did. I have more status. I believed when there weren't even photos yet, right? So there were people who went there to see. Most of them went to party. That's what I've been told. And according to someone, I was told they had a great time. What happened? The evening went on. The evening went on. The evening went on. Some fell asleep. Others kept partying. And eventually the sun came up. The sun came up, and just as it had, they went to their cars and started heading down. Someone walked down. I know they walked down around 7 o'clock. What happened with Joan? Joan kept the bar closed for 2 or 3 more days. And suddenly, one day, he appeared and continued with his ufology topic without any problem at all. Of course, I don't want to give the impression that on the day of the meeting, the UFO phenomenon died down. I like to use it because it was the moment when the most people came. But the funniest thing about searching for articles is that this meeting was the biggest one, which made it create even more buzz and more articles, because obviously this meeting was in all the articles. Curiously, there are 2 types of journalists. People who say the meeting was an absolute success because there were X people, and the other who says it was an absolute failure because the aliens didn't arrive. There's a very funny reflection here, which is, what kind of journalist says it was a failure because the aliens didn't come. What kind? I mean, really, this person genuinely and wholeheartedly believes in aliens. For me, personally, I think it was a remarkably triumphant success to make people come from all over the world to gaze up and stare at the night sky. How many people came to Soyer to get to know Soyer? I don't mean in a tourist sense, in a personal sense. They became friends. They made relationships for something that only had one photo at that time. There was supposedly evidence with 8 millimeters. There were more photos, but everything I've seen, you don't quite believe. You have to use a lot of imagination. So if imagination moves mountains, and that is very, very, very beautiful. To conclude a bit, we will try to answer some of those questions. I'm telling you now that I don't have the answer to all of them, not even half. But, for example, a very clear question is, what were the lights seen on the mountain? And that have even continued to be seen until not so long ago. I'm talking about 20 years ago. There are still people who have seen them. One thing that's for sure is that there was a military man, which is the Manis's case, who saw these orange lights that chased them and so on. Another military man like Don Pedro Crespi also claims that on the radar there appeared 4 lights in a formation that he calls a military formation. The CIA, and it's no joke, declassified the documents in 2018 because 40 years had passed, I believe, in 2018. They also investigated this plane, and I don't know how the matter ended because what they write is not clear at all. There are many things that are crossed out, even though it's declassified. But a summary that I think is logical is that the Americans having a base around there flew fighter jets. It seems obvious to me that they were using the latest technology fighter jets. And they went whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And we're talking about fighter jets that they were going at Mach 3, which is a brutal speed. And when they fly, they even break the sound barrier. I imagine with those engines, they must make an impressive fire at night. I don't know. I'm no aviation expert. I think it's not far-fetched at all to say there were military tests or basically fighter jets flying through that area. Now that explains some of the lights. There are many other lights that are vertical with strange movements that can't be explained. I have the feeling that basically the Americans were doing whatever they felt like doing. And that's what gave it this magic. I also have to say that the movements that defy the laws of physics, moving, bam, bam, from one side to the other. I don't know what the explanation for that would be. And there has to be something strange going on. Something inexplicable is there. And being very skeptical, I think there are things we can't understand and never will. It could be light reflections. It could be very complex things. I don't know. Have they continued to be seen? Yes, yes. In fact, about 10 or 15 years ago, there was a group of 5 or 6 people who all saw, they were walking to Luke. They saw a movement that was also, it is all very strange. Other common explanations they have for this phenomenon is that they felt a powerful energy from deep within and so on. Well, much like Pep Clement, the woman who experienced that strange orgasm. That can be explained by 2 specific things. First, I remember that I saw a very impressive shooting star one day. So impressive that it gave me goosebumps. I don't know why. Call it cosmic energy, call it me just being terrified. I said, wow. And it was a shooting star and it gave me goosebumps. I can't imagine what you must feel when you see a fighter jet make a brutal turn. You don't know it's a jet and it makes a fire explosion. What's more, add to that maybe you've taken a little bit of acid. Imagine for 2 or 3 or 4 years, people have been telling you it's extraterrestrial. Imagine you're at the very top of Pug Major and you've been freezing for 5 hours. In January, I think that someone must have literally crapped on you. Strange if nobody crapped themselves. The thing is, maybe the witnesses who said people crapped themselves didn't explain it that way. The woman who had the orgasm, if we all had orgasms seeing things in the sky, the world would be happier. The explanation of the cave, I love the cave, because as Jaume says, these symbols had already been there forever. And something else Jaume explains, I'll play the audio for you.
Of course, all this was widely thought to be from prehistoric times, from an ancient sanctuary. And in the end, all these drawings are that some are fakes. These from 716 are fakes. And because they can't be attributed to that era. And then the other geometric ones that were also thought to be ancient, prehistoric, no, they're a kind of chess game from medieval times.
It could be like a board game, I don't know. Others say they are forgeries. And of course, my question is when and who. The question is, did they appear in 78 or was it in 78 that they were noticed? If someone made them, who went into the cave to paint that? I find that amusing as well, because during this investigation and not long ago, I haven't explained much because sometimes it loses its magic. Many things actually happen for real. And others I haven't told you because they're so crude, so strange, that I know they were trying to feed me a lie. And I didn't want to tell you out of respect for you, but they're just as interesting, if not more. People saying there are lights on the mountain, but there were also people using kites and ship flares, attaching a flare to a kite and flying it to try and create lights. People who went fishing and said, now, before the sun comes up, we'll set off a flare, so people think. And that happened too. I found it funny that it's a mix between reality and people who want to add fuel to the fire, right? So, in the cave, with that half-proof, someone went in there one day and said, look, now you'll see what we'll do here, and this will lead to... I think this person who went into the cave and made this drawing, I don't think they realized that 45 years later, someone would be talking about this drawing. What else? The numbers. The numbers on the mountain. That's it, the numbers on the mountain. That they marked 226, it was the day of the sighting. I thought it was incredible, because surely many of you thought, what a load of nonsense about the 226 seen on the Soyer mountain. It's no joke, because someone here knows people from Soyer, or people watching this maybe from Catalonia. Well, yes, hopefully there are people from elsewhere listening, or people seeing it subtitled. Go on Instagram and find someone from Soyer and write to them for me. Hey, is there a number on the mountain? Let's see what they tell you. Why am I telling you this? Because 7 or 8 years ago, I had this argument with some friends who debated what was on the mountain. And indeed, I didn't believe it. And they showed me and on the Sawyer mountain, you can see the number. The thing is, not everyone sees the same thing. So there are several explanations here. There's one explanation that basically there's a hole in the mountain. And by chance, like that Pinguino Rodriguez effect from the song where you hear Pinguino Rodriguez, and it doesn't say Pinguino Rodriguez, but you predisposed hear it. The theory that when you expect to see a number, you see it. The thing is, truly and honestly, what you see actually looks a lot like a specific number. Quite exaggeratedly like a number. And here comes my second theory. I think this was set up by someone, but then I think it could be from the 70s. Just as people painted caves, it could be someone who went there using bleach to make a number on the mountain. I don't know. Maybe I'm just paranoid. Maybe I'm making it up. It could be my theory. Then there's another theory I've been told, which is a theory for the true believers who say that one of those flying saucers, as they call them, I'm saying it in Spanish because they told me in Spanish, was flying, and that with a laser it made the number to warn everyone to come. That's the theory I like best. It's a theory that was developed in 78. The thing is, since aliens didn't come, the debate could have been, maybe they don't have good handwriting, maybe, I imagine he went there and said, damn, the aliens haven't arrived. Let's see if it wasn't 226 and it was 228. Maybe they're coming in August. Maybe they're coming in 2 months because we misread it. And the aliens are saying, damn, I told you to make a space. I told you to put 22 of... Well, that's it. I'll shut up now. I don't believe it, but it's the one I like best. I want to believe it. I'm going to believe it. From now on, I'll only explain the laser theory, and I invite you to explain the laser theory. So, a couple more things. Iglesias' radio station closed down. It never broadcast again. Jose, that crazy preacher, disappeared just as he had arrived, I guess on the 22nd. He did disappear around the 22nd, so maybe they took Jose. I'd like to think that Jose, the preacher, was taken by the aliens because no one has ever heard from him again. So what I find most interesting about this story is that even today, the echoes of this story still continue. I say this because in 2020, I'm talking about only 5 years ago, I had just finished the sighting short film, so I was very involved in the UFO topic. And one day, walking down the street, I saw an A2 size poster, very large, that said definitive theory. It was half torn because it had been stuck up for months. And I saw one, I saw two, I saw many, and I said, what are these posters doing in Sawyer that say definitive theory, UFOs, Cuba? And I said, what is this? It was like half torn. You couldn't read it well. I took photos with my phone. And after 3 or 4 days, my phone rings. I pick up the phone. And he says to me, hi, I'm Albert Girones. You don't know me, but I also like UFOs a lot. And I said, what? And it turns out that Albert Girones, who is an artist, Catalan, who somehow through a friend from Sawyer learned about the story of the aliens. He spent a week or two on vacation in Sawyer researching and asking around, and he loved the story so much that he researched it on his own. He researched so much that one day playing GTA 5 with his brother, he saw the map of in GTA 5, there's an area with some caves and there are drawings. I don't know it very well because I don't play GTA 5, and he mixed two theories and created what he calls the definitive theory. As for the complete and detailed explanation regarding the mysterious 1978 sightings in Soya, the definitive answer can be found within the secretly hidden and classified documents located inside a cave in the massive world of Grand Theft Auto 5. It's a fucking crazy theory, and it's wonderful. I have to say that Albert Girones is not a madman, but a performance artist, and he created a parallel theory to feed the popular legends. Besides, Albert is a great guy, and one day a letter arrived at our house. A letter, very mystical. I didn't know who it was from. It had no name, and when I opened it, I found a silver paper fanzine. And when I opened it, I started seeing things about Sawyer and aliens and articles. And I said, what is this? What is this? It must be Albert's work, I imagine, right? So, sure enough, I wrote to Albert, and he told me, no, it's just that I've made a fanzine that it talks about the whole UFO phenomenon in Sawyer with new theories, new testimonies, and things he's found over these last few months. It's a beautiful work, and it's like, he didn't just send it to me because he's super nice. So he made many copies and distributed them in strategic places in Sawyer, in bars. He left them abandoned on street corners so the people of Sawyer would find them and reactivate the movement. I think it's a beautiful thing Albert did, and a hug to Albert here too. Thanks for contributing this culture. Music-wise, I remember a great album by a group called Tramuntana Abduction, which was by Luis Boras. Many people will know Luis Boras because he's a musician from Sawyer, who's impressive actually, from progressive rock to more classic rock. He's done it all. And then why not say it? A guy who helped me a lot with this research is also Pere Andreu. Pere Andreu released a great album called Del Espacio, which has a track that talks precisely about this, about Bar Memphis, about Joan Call. A very, very beautiful track that, in fact, I'll play for you at the end of... Actually, I'll play it for you right now. And they made a music video with Joseph Alorda that's also very cool, with some very cool images. A car crossing the fog towards nowhere.
I un groc som sospitosos si venen de lluny.
One of the most surprising things that happened while I was investigating this topic, Joan Torrance says, about 10 days after my uncle had died, Bar Turismo called me with a trembling voice saying, come right now because a letter has arrived for Joan. And I thought, how can it be that a letter for Joan arrived at Bar Turismo? Why not send it to our house, to his house? And they said, no, come, just like that. Then it was an envelope that didn't even have a name on it. It was just addressed to Bar Turismo, which is a bar in Sawyer. He opened it, and inside there was an explanatory letter and another envelope. And the first letter, I want to read it, it said, I'm not sure if Joan can respond directly to our request. If not, perhaps he could do so through you. We also learned that he has a niece, Florentine Toranskoy. Well, Toranskoy altogether. Basically, it was a letter asking for Joan that his people had to open. Because Joan was no longer there, unfortunately, the letter arrived 10 days late. A shame, it's from a certain Anna Wong who sent the letter from Mexico to Sawyer and explains, she tells it very nicely, saying she was in Sawyer during the 70s and early 80s and that they were undoubtedly the best years of her life and that she was very, very happy in that land, and above all, she has very good memories of Bar Memphis with Joan and all that group of people, and that she remembers with much affection an extraordinarily intricate, multi-armed Buddhist statue that they had prominently displayed at the Memphis bar. Then he politely and kindly asks Joan if he could take this beautiful statue home. And instead of it being in Sawyer, in a bar or in a house, he should send it to Canada, to a center called Malgama, so that a certain Eric Liderman could take care of the statue because he is a spiritual leader. In Canada, there's this sanctuary where there are thousands of statues that all have magical powers. So it seems very nice. How a person from so far away, so many years later remembers, sends a letter to Joan precisely. Joan was no longer there to make him remember that statue that gave them that power. Magic. But it wasn't the statue that gave the power. Magic. Nor was it the aliens that made it fun. What was fun was, well, Joan, who was a guy who fought, who had dreams. Many people followed him, not just Joan, but everyone around him who decidedly chose to believe in something collective. The aliens are the least of it, but it was a way to meet, to discuss. It's almost anti-system and anti-capitalist because it was a way to have fun collectively. For free. It doesn't matter. Do anything, it just ensures you're with people going up somewhere and looking at the sky. It was the only thing this hobby asked of you that had everyone fascinated. I also found interesting the reflection that for so many years of having a mandatory belief like Christianity, maybe I'm exaggerating, but you could not believe, you could not participate. The church was right there in Soyer, and besides, it's huge and watches everyone. It has this component authoritarian, unfortunately, during those years of the dictatorship regime. Suddenly the dictatorship dissipates, disappears, and suddenly a kind of freedom appears. But of course, people don't stop believing. Maybe they stop believing in this God, but people need to continue having a spirit, to continue being spiritual. So it's a way of, I want to keep believing, but believe in something else, right? And believing in the third is a legitimate belief, especially because none of the people who believe had a negative part. So I also found this creation of the Neo Party Fund. It was Joan Cole. And all his disciples or friends created what is now called a Neo Party. On June 22nd, we go up here and have fun. I propose that from now on, every June 22nd, we go to Cova to have a good time, to see aliens, to see or sing or do whatever. Then, more questions I've had or reflections is if Joan is a crazy person, if he was crazy and sugar, or if he was really playing with everyone. So, talking with many people, they've told me both things. Sometimes it seemed he was crazy and sugar, sometimes not sugar. Joan was a person all his life, a functional person. He had a business, he had parents, he had friends, and he never had any problem. He was never institutionalized. He didn't have any mental problem. So this, I have to think about it, that he had this hybridization. Sometimes he did believe, sometimes maybe he went further, but it never affected his personal life in that sense. So, as we also said before, he also does magic tricks, like the light bulb one. He also told me about a trick he does with a plate and lighting a cigarette, which are typical tricks done in bars. Tricks have to be prepared, so he knew it wasn't true, and yet he still sold it. So the cool thing is never knowing if Joan believes or doesn't believe what he says. But in his writings, I found something that I find beautiful that perhaps gives us the answer, whether Joan believes it or not, if he was crazy or not crazy. And it also gives the answer to all those who followed him, because many people who went up there weren't crazy. There wasn't a single crazy person. In fact, the crazy thing, this was told to me by Guillaume Lobo. Told me something funny. He said, not going up there, not believing in UFOs, that was stupid, he told me simply, as if to say not participating was stupid. Let someone rational say, no, UFOs don't exist. You're a fool. You're a fool because we're having a great time. Here, that is, believing is worth it. And Joan left a sentence written in his notebook that says, it is possible that it is all just imagination, but when I die, I will die satisfied, for in it I will have lived. I find it a truly magnificent and profound statement to describe this feeling. The UFO movement that he nurtured. And another sentence that Joan left, which I also find super lucid. Friend, whoever you are, when you take the helm of the UFO subject, I beg you to guide those who follow you with your truth so that they can successfully reach their own goals entirely on their own. And then it will be them who eventually guide your future steps. I find it beautiful. Besides, it has something that shows Joan's goodness, that Joan wasn't a preacher, he wasn't a guru, he was just one of them. And I also find it a very cool way of sharing, because perfectly in any extraterrestrial story, people appear who feel enlightened, the person who wants to be the protagonist, and that's not Joan's case. Joan didn't ask to be the protagonist, but he was because of his ability to convince. In fact, there's an article dedicated to him in the newspaper where they put a beautiful sentence, which is more or less, perhaps Joan doesn't convince, but he is contagious. And it's a bit of a summary of this story that it doesn't matter if you believe it, it's enough to let yourself go, right? Finally, I'd like to wholeheartedly thank Joan Coy for everything he did, wherever he is, though I imagine he wouldn't feel like being in heaven, to Pep Clement as well, for all his contributions to photography and everything he moved, to Trini Cancera for all the information she's given me, to Per Andreu as well for assisting me so kindly. Just to remind you that A Man All Alone is a podcast produced by Somera Films with the support of the Institute of Cultural Industries of the Balearic Islands in collaboration with ICIB. I hope you liked it, that you recommend it, and see you in the next episode. In the next one, we'll talk about one of the most mysterious, elegant people born in Mallorca, a Hollywood star of international fame with an invented name. I imagine many of you already know who it is. For those who don't, you'll have to wait for the next episode, okay? See you in Cuba. I'm Guillem from the UFOs. See you soon. Oh, and what's playing is Pere Andreo's song From Space.
Un cotxe travessant sa boira cap a Lluc. Llum grocs són sospitosos si venen de lluny. El restaurant d'escorc que mira un bot sagrat. La carretera és feta dels americans. He perdut el rellotge a la font d'Esnoguet. Hem cercat camamil·la i hem perdut el temps. No tenim instruccions, ningú mos ha ensenyat. Duim una ràdio Fènix que ara no va más. Psicofonies buides, no me voldria perdre, estic il·luminat. Serena de novembre, ovnis d'esplà de cua. Ha mort un militar. Puja tota castanya, ha arribat el moment. Ja feia massa dies que ho tenia en ment. He duit 5.000 persones, tot ho tenc pensat. M'enduc una maleta feta per si un cas. De botelles des Memphis han fetes vermut. Davall sa Via Làctia amb el cap per amunt. Si en el Llombard se pillen ràdios de Marroc, damunt el Puigmajor l'espaciós més a prop. Psicofonies buides, no m'ho voldria perdre, que vaig empiternat. Serena de novembre, ovnis d'esplà de cua. Ha mort un militar. T'he perdut a sa curva, encara queden restes d'un mal accident. Les estrelles mos miren, arribarem a Lluc. Enguany o l'any que ve. Que ha sortit des Memphis cap a Lluc.